The 1930s, simultaneously a time of sorrow and of hope. The struggle of day-to-day life in the Depression. Waiting for hours on the doorsteps of a church for a single slice of bread, or standing in line during the freezing hours of the early morning for a small bowl of soup. The desperate acts of a parent to provide for their child, working long hours with arborable machinery. The greatest generation, or those who grew up during this time of trial, found themselves to be survivors of the period. Many are left with incredible stories of their triumph and struggle. The scars, formed by years of laboring to make a living during the transition period from the 1930s to early 40s, emerge now as the greatest begin to tell their stories.
$0.07 cotton and a 40-cent meat. How in the world can a poor man eat? Flour up high and
throughout the nation, men and women forgotten look to us here for guidance. I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people.
Things are looking up, Mabel. Of course, I still need a job, but so does...
We sell surplus apples, 5 cents a piece on the street corner. And if you're bewildered, panicky at what's happening to you in your country, you aren't alone. Because biggest industrialist has openly admitted, I am afraid. Every man is afraid. Prosperity is just around the corner, say the hopeful headlines. But around the corners wind the lengthening bread lines, and a whole new class of citizens appears in American society, the new poor. And private charity can no longer carry the burden, the states are forced to act. The New York governor, Franklin Roosevelt, is the first to supply direct emergency relief to the unemployed. The same paralysis that lames the cities blights the farms, and out in the country too, men are asking, what's wrong, what's happening? Farm prices have dropped disastrously. Many are beyond joking. A report from Detroit says men are sitting in the parks all day long, out of work, muttering to themselves.
I was born in 1933, so I lived the first years of my life during the Great Depression. I remember when I was about 4 years old, my mother and my father got a divorce, and my brother, who was about 18 months older than I was, went to live with my grandmother and grandfather, who had a very small farm. It had about 80 acres, but they did grow a lot of vegetables and things that we had to eat. But we were poor. We really didn't know we were that poor because there were so many other families that were our neighbors that were so much poorer than we were that we sometimes even helped them by giving them some of the vegetables that we had grown in our garden. I do remember that my mother got something called ADC, which was Aid to Dependent Children. And it was like excess things that the government had, and I don't know where they got this excess food from, but it was mainly like cheese and flour and that kind of thing that we would go and get and take home with us so we would have something a little different to eat. My brother and I started school, and my mother finally got a job as secretary to the superintendent at the small school that we went to, and my grandfather died, and my grandmother went to work in the cafeteria at the school. And I always remember my grandmother when she would see me in the line and it was something that I really liked, she would always give me an extra helping of it. I remember my mother bought a used car. It was a 1934 Chevrolet, and I don't remember what year she bought it. But I do remember going to the gas station, and gas was like 16 cents a gallon. I don't remember too much other than that, about the Depression, but I do remember about Franklin Roosevelt because my grandmother was a staunch Republican and her son was a staunch Democrat, so he was for President Roosevelt and my grandmother was not, and they used to have big arguments and have a lot of fun together, chiding each other about which one was better. And I do know that he had paralysis and he was crippled and had to be in a wheelchair. Most of the time he could stand, but with the help of somebody or a chair or something to lean on. But he didn't want the people to know that he was crippled. He had polio, and so his pictures were always taken from the waist up. I think that the war is what got us out of the Great Depression, because then all the men had to go to war and the women